Welcome back, everyone. It is Thursday night live time. Even though it's Friday, I had an event last night, and I'm proud of myself for making the lives work this summer. I had no idea how busy. I know how busy summer gets in Northern Michigan, specifically when you're helping a lot of people, but I didn't realize how hard it would be to fit these lives in. Good news for you, good news for myself is these are my favorite parts of the week. I look forward to them. I do them. I've only missed a couple in the course of a year or so. I look forward to jumping on here every Thursday, well, today, Friday, and talking about what's actually going on in Northern Michigan real estate, what's happening here. So whether you're thinking about relocating here, you're on the fence about whether you're going to stay here or not, you live here already, I come here to answer all things real estate related, Northern Michigan related. And we've got a great one tonight. This is the halftime report. We're going to talk about what has happened in the first half of this year. I've got 10 bold predictions. I've got 10 shocking truths, and I've got some stats. So after watching this, whether you're watching it live or on the replay, after you watch this, you're going to have a better idea of what's going on in Northern Michigan real estate. Shameless plug before I get started. I don't know if you can see this or not, but we are at 1793 subscribers. So if there's anybody in your life that you think would get value out of this video, please share it with them, ask them to subscribe. That way they are in the loop and know what's going on in Northern Michigan real estate. I'm excited. I remember back when I thought hitting 1,000 subscribers would be impossible, and now we're closing in on 2,000 subscribers. There's a huge team behind the scenes that helps me with these videos. I'm just the person that comes on here and delivers the information. So it means the world to them. It means the world to me when you subscribe. So if you're not yet subscribed, whether you're watching this live or the replay, it would mean the world to us if you do so. And thank you so much for being part of this growing community. I always say this when I started with these videos, I had no idea what I was going to turn into. And again, I remember I had 20 subscribers, and now we're closing in on 2,000. I've helped a lot of you buy houses. I've got to know a lot of you. I've had a few local people call me to sell their house. So this has really turned into a great part of my business. And again, thank you so much for being here. Let's see what the first comment coming in is. Dr. Ian, as always, yeah, boy, Ian has helped. If you've been watching me for any time, you know that Ian has been not only one of my best friends, but our preferred lender for a very long time. He's helped so many of our clients and constantly get rave reviews, which is why we continue to send them to Ian, because I believe when you're buying a house, you have a team. It's the realtor, it's the lender, it's the title company, it's the home inspector. So we have a lot of those vendors lined up and ready to help you. And, just really make your experience. I was talking to a client right before I hopped on today, and he was having an issue with somebody involved in the transaction. I said, look, I'll do whatever I can to help you, because at the end of the day, I want this to be the best experience you've ever had buying a house. And he appreciated that. So as always, thanks, Ian. We're going to have Ian. He doesn't know this yet, but we're going to have Ian on probably in the next couple of weeks to talk about what has happened in the first half of the year with mortgage rates and what to expect in the second half of the year with mortgage rates. Again, Ian and I talk every single day, at least 20 times a day. And our conversations circle around a lot of things. Often it's life or business, but we often talk about, obviously, as it relates to you, interest rates. And these interest rates do not appear to be coming down anytime soon. Now, there's some projects coming. There's some lending products coming up there that are, making it a little bit easier. And Ian's company is doing a great job, as well as other lenders in the area. But it's getting a little bit harder out there. And that's something we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about 10 shocking truths about the real estate market. My 10 bold predictions. And at the end, I have a giant prediction that I'm going to write down and come back when we do the end of the year recap in December, right around Christmas time, and see if what I said is true or not. So again, this is not my normal time. It's been an incredibly busy week. I had a charity event last night at 7, which is normally the time I come on here. I'm going to actually a concert, Colt Ford, great country artist, at the Odawa Casino, just a few minutes from my office after this. I had clients all day today, so I'm just very blessed with activity. And after a relatively slow first half of the year, which we're going to get into, happy to see things picking up. If I were just to talk to you, if we were just at a coffee shop or a bar, have a coffee or a glass of wine, and we were talking about what happened in the first half of this year without all the, formal stuff that I'm going to share with you in a minute, I would say the first quarter of this year was the hardest quarter of my entire real estate career. Now, I've been doing this for 22 years, so maybe I have a revisionist history, and I'm not remembering back in the day when things were, really hard back in 2008, which seems like a lifetime ago. The first quarter was tough. We had a really tough first quarter, but then we had a really good second quarter. So first quarter's tough, good second quarter, and then the third quarter seemed to really go back to being a little bit harder than we expected, which is what every economist on the news predicted. They said the winter was going to be hard, which it was. They said the spring market's going to be really good because the spring market is always really good. That's when people who need to buy or have a strong desire to buy or sell choose to do so, and that sort of carried us. And then from Memorial Day, and this is just my personal business. I know there are other agents out there who have experienced something differently, but my personal business, the stretch between Memorial Day and July 4th was very quiet. Northern Michigan was busy, but we just did not see a lot of activity. And from my perspective, once we got past July 4th, it really picked up again. And we are seeing, I'm in a sales business, and real estate is very, there's a cycle to it. Somebody starts a search, a few whatever later, they start to look, they find a home. So there's, somebody doesn't decide they're going to buy a house, as a lot of you don't decide you're going to buy a house today and then buy a house tomorrow. There's a there's a pretty long lifespan to houses. So we've gotten a lot of people since July 4th come in and decide they're going to start the process. So we've been as busy as we've ever been servicing people. There's still, inventory starting to stack up, which is going to lead me to my big prediction at the end of this. So stick around to the end. And if you're watching this as a replay, just skip to the end and find my big prediction about what's going to happen in the second half of the market. So without further ado, let's get into this is my 10 predictions. Buyer's market gains. It's supposed to say ground. It says ground. You spelled that wrong. So I'm not gonna throw Candace on the bus because she's the one that does this, but it's supposed to say ground, and she just had a typo. It's been a seller's market all year. I think economically, when you look at the economic indicators, it is still a seller's market. Now, we're going to get into some of the statistics of why that's shifting tonight, so stick around. It is definitely shifting at the very moment into a buyer's market. Now, we just won a deal for a client that went highest and best. We had another client get a house. They paid full price. There was a couple other people interested. So the certain listings, whether it's downtown Petoskey or on one of the premier lakes, those houses are still going, are still very competitive. It just seems like, if you look at Northern Michigan and you say there's the A inventory, the B inventory, and the C inventory, the B and C is struggling a little bit. The A is probably always going to go strong because there's just so much demand for in town, downtown Petoskey under 500 grand, Burt Lake, Walloon Lake, Lake Charlotte. That stuff is still going to be popular. It's just the next tier down is really starting to struggle a little bit. So with that being said, it's definitely starting to become more of a buyer's market than it once was. Ian, weigh in if you disagree with this. We think mortgage rates are going to stabilize or dip slightly. It seems like they've been hovering right around 6.5% this year. We expect them to go maybe a little bit lower than that. There are some adjustable rate mortgage products out there, which we can get into if you're looking at getting pre-approved, that are under 6. There's some conditions that come with that. So definitely reach out if that's something you're interested in. But I don't think we're going to see. Now, look, every day it seems like Jerome Powell and Donald Trump are fighting on the news. So I don't know if one day we wake up and something has drastically changed in the world and interest rates drop. But I don't think that's going to be the case. So I'm confident in saying the interest rates are going to be the interest rates this year, which is obviously contributing to this becoming a buyer's market because it is very expensive to buy a house right now. And also it's interesting because it's expensive to buy a house, but then also we don't have as much inventory as we would otherwise because there are people that aren't selling their houses because a lot of the inventory we have are for people buying houses, meaning somebody buys a house and then their old house becomes the inventory. We're just not seeing a lot of that right now. Actually, I had this conversation with somebody this week, and I'm afraid that even if interest rates drop, it might even continue to be a shift towards a buyer's market because that's going to create a lot of inventory when people right now, this is what I think would happen. If interest rates were to drop, I think the market would be flooded with inventory of people wanting to sell their old house to buy a new house. And I think that would also contribute to being a buyer's market a little bit. So definitely an interesting situation. Ian says, 100% agree. Rates have certainly stabilized in the mid to high 6s, but I feel confident we'll see them to slowly continue to improve. I hope Ian is right because I know a lot of you are waiting for that. If that's the case, just keep watching the market. Make sure you're on our email list. Sign up for genosguide.com. our weekly newsletter because we're just trying to keep our buyers and our clients in the loop as to what is going on. Inventory levels continue to rise. We definitely have seen the seasonal listings come on the market. There are a lot of listings that have, today, just for example, today we have what's called the hot sheet in our MLS, which shows new listings, expired listings, closed, and price changes. And I swear the price change list has been bigger than I've seen in a long time. So I've mentioned a few times, but I'll mention again in case you're new here. If you're looking for a deal on a house in Northern Michigan, go onto Zillow or go onto our website or homes.com or wherever you look for homes and filter out the houses that have been on the market for, I used to say 90 days. I would say this time of year, 60 days is even enough. Those are where the deals are, because the deals we're getting accepted under list price are the houses that have been on the market for a while. If a house has been on the market for a day or two, typically can't get a significant discount. But if it makes it past that, I'm telling you, and this is something we prepare our sellers for, the conversation we're having often with our sellers right now is make sure you're putting pressure on the market by lowering your listing price and taking that leverage back, because you don't want to be the person that's been on the market for 100 days and has never lowered your list price, because that's, you're giving away a lot of leverage, and that's just certainly not going to bode well for the process. Home price grow. I don't know why she was using this word. Home price cools. I agree with that. I think home prices are starting to cool. I think the thing that's really interesting is if you look at if you live in Northern Michigan now and you're looking at what your home is worth today compared to what it was worth 2 years ago, you're probably disappointed. If you look at what it was worth 5-10 years ago, you should still be happy. There are people out there now that paid $300,000 for their house, did minimal upgrades, and are disappointed that it's not worth $700,000, but it's worth $600,000. If that's the case, everybody wants to get as much money as they can for their home, and I'm certainly here to help you do that. But if your house, you paid $300,000, put a little bit into it, live there, enjoyed it, and now it's worth, a handful of years later, it's worth $650,000. The house did what it was supposed to do from an investment standpoint. Of course, everybody wants to hit a home run and make as much money as they possibly can. But I think we need to be realistic and understand that when prices were artificially inflated because of, hopefully a once in a lifetime pandemic that caused the government to have to slash interest rates in order to get people to buy homes, thus driving the prices up. And now, look, the real estate market, I was just talking to somebody about this. The real estate market now is still the result of COVID. I would just say this is the hangover. I think, in my opinion, COVID happened, prices drove up, everything went crazy, and now, there was a party, and now this is the hangover, and we're certainly slugging through it. Like every hangover, it's going to be a little bit bumpy, but I do think once we start to realize that this is the new norm, seems like every couple of years there's a new norm or a new normal. I think this is the new normal. This is the market this is just how it's going to be. A couple of years ago or 3-4 years ago, I told everybody this is how it's going to be for a while. I think right now how the market is how it's going to be for a while. So if you need to buy a house, need to sell a house, just understand that, and you're going to be perfectly fine. There are still deals out there. If you're a seller, you're still going to get a lot more for your house than you probably expected when you bought it. So we're going to be okay. And that is my attempt to try to calm everybody down a little bit. Land sales and custom builds surge. Maybe this is an indication that we're going to have a builder out here in the near future, but maybe this is an indication that building prices are coming down a little bit, because I've had a lot more clients this year buy land and build. For a long time, building was expensive. You had to book it really far out, and a lot of people were just choosing not to build, and that caused people to just not build. And we filled a couple pieces of land this year where people were going to build custom homes. And these aren't, $5-10 million houses. These are $1 million, $2 million, $750,000, which, don't get me wrong, it's still a lot of money, but it's definitely more attainable than, a few years ago when it seemed like the only people building houses were people building, or were individuals or families, building $5 to $10 million houses. Vacation home demands hold steady. This is 100% true. We've seen a lot of big sales in Northern Michigan this year, which is an indication, I think, that we usually try to watch what the high-end sales do, because it seems like that pool is more dialed into what's going on in the world than some of the other pools. And that's how we could tell. That was one of the biggest indicators in Northern Michigan that we could tell that the market was about to surge, is when there was a rush on $3, $4, $5 million houses right after COVID. And now we're still seeing there's been a $11 million sale in the last week, a $9 million sale, $8 million. There's still big sales happening. And I think that's a good biomarker or economic indicator for Northern Michigan that things are going to be okay. The reason that I think the vacation home buyer in Northern Michigan is usually a little bit more financially set than other buyers in Northern Michigan. Right? That's not to take anything away from anybody. That is just the truth of the matter. And we are starting to also pull from a much broader pool than we used to for the vacation home buyer, largely because COVID shined a giant light on Northern Michigan. Also, the Traverse City Airport has opened up a lot of service, and suddenly reaching or extending or coming to Northern Michigan is a lot easier than it once was. And I think those are a couple of things that are making vacation homes here sell a lot more quickly. Rental inventory remains tight. I always tell people the only thing harder than buying a house in Northern Michigan is renting a house in Northern Michigan. Across the board, there are very little homes for rent. Now, Petoskey has a bunch of condos coming on the market. There's going to be a ton of new inventory, so that should help things a little bit. But as of right now, the rental market's tough. I'm genuinely curious in how the market absorbs the 200 to 300 units just in Petoskey that are coming out for rentals, and that's certainly much needed. They're still going to be a little bit expensive, but it's a start. And again, I'm genuinely curious how that goes. Baby boomer sellers quietly re-enter the market as we see interest rates lower. We're going to see baby boomers add their homes to the market for more inventory. So that is definitely something to watch. And this is a little bit about the same as the vacation homes. Migration from urban areas continues. It seems like every day I'm talking to somebody new who is relocating here from a metropolitan area that just wants a quieter pace of life, a slower pace of life, a safer pace of life. And Northern Michigan, if you can make Northern Michigan work with the home prices and job market, if you can work within those constraints, there's no better place to live. And every year it just keeps getting better and better. Summer to fall sales window expands. I think, again, this is going to tie into a little bit to my one big prediction at the end, my one giant prediction. So make sure you stick around for that. I think our sales season is going to go a little bit further into the winter this year. There's a lot of inventory in the market. This isn't my big prediction, but one of my predictions is you're going to see a lot of those price reductions happen a little bit later than we normally do, maybe in September or October, which is going to cause a lot of buyers to buy, and that's going to carry us deeper into the winter than we're used to. So that is the 10 predictions for the second half of 2025. Now we're going to go through some stats, which I think you're going to find super interesting. Then after that, I'm going to give you my 10 shocking truths, and then I'm going to finish with my one giant prediction. So make sure you stick around for the one giant prediction. I'm going to split my screen a little bit so we can go through some of these slides. I think you're going to find this extremely interesting. So bear with me 1 second. The company I use to do these videos changed the way they do the slides, so bear with me a little bit. So units sold in the entire MLS, in all of Northern Michigan in 2024, it was 1,506 houses sold. This year to this point, the same point, it was 1,430. I'm going to do the math real quick. That is a 5.1% decline, which is big. 5.1. That declining, that's a big number. Days on market went from 88 to 92, meaning the days on market went up about another 4.5%. So those are two indicators that it's shifting towards a buyer's market. One, the number of units selling is down. The days on market is going up. Those are two big ones. The average sale price this year has gone up, which is incredibly interesting, especially if you look at the median. So the median and the average went up, meaning there have been less sales, but the sales that are happening are higher than the last couple of years. This is breakdown. I hope you can see this. If anybody, let me know if you can see this. If you're watching this live, again, these conversations are meant to be interactive. I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you for this halfway report, but if you have any questions about what's going on in Northern Michigan, it can be anything related to Northern Michigan real estate. I'm here to answer the questions. So make sure you drop the questions in the chat. So this is the units sold compared to for the three regions. These aren't the 3 towns or 3 counties, 3 regions that we cover. So Charlevoix and Emmett had less sales. The only, if you look at these 3 sets, the only area that saw an increase in units sold was the Grand Traverse Antrim area. And I think my guess is, I have a suspicion. The reason I think that is I think it's because Traverse City has done a much better job with new construction than the other areas. If you're just in Traverse City, I've got a lot of, it seems like every real estate company in Traverse City now is affiliated with a builder. There is a ton of new inventory coming on the market, entire subdivisions, which I think has really played a part in this. So let's go over to the next slide. Ian, who lives in Traverse City, so I was going to say exactly. Yeah, I think that's the reason. So days on market. Days on market in Charlevoix and Emmett County dropped a little bit. Sheboygan and Otsego County. Now those markets, the days on market has gone up. Traverse City the same way. I think this goes back to, I think it's so interesting. When I was going through this, I thought the statistics and the information, and look, this is one of the reasons I do these lives in the YouTube channel in general, is I think it's taught me a lot, or it's forced me to pay a lot closer attention to the numbers because I report them back to you guys. I think the reason this is happening is there are a lot fewer houses in Charlevoix and Emmett County. Now that Charlevoix and Emmett County cover Charlevoix, Boyne City, Petoskey, Harbor Springs. There have been now it's starting to add up a little bit, but in the first half of this year, there were very few houses in Petoskey that were on the market, which is why I think caused a little bit more demand. If you look at Sheboygan, Otsego, and even in the Traverse City Antrim area, the days on market there is going up a little bit. My guess is it's because of the influx of inventory in Traverse City is what was causing Traverse City's inventory to go up. The average sale price. Now this is something that's really interesting. The average sale price. Let me see what the next slide is. The average sale price in Charlevoix and Emmett County has gone up significantly, and I think that ties back because remember, the average sale price doesn't remove the outliers. That is just everything that is sold divided by the number that is, and this is a really good indication of why. So Charlevoix and Emmett County both have very high-end sales and a very big high-end market, and I think this is an indicator of that. So if you go over to the median market and if you look back at the average and look over the median, if you remove those outliers, it's a lot more balanced, meaning those big sales are really skewing the market. But if you go back and look, it doesn't affect the market in Traverse City nearly as much as it does in Petoskey. So let's talk about individuals. Let's break down individual towns. So Petoskey, where I'm recording from tonight, where I live, my office is downtown Petoskey. We sell everywhere, but Petoskey's home to us. Last year, 2024, 95 houses sold in the first half of this year. There were only 74 in the second half of this year. So let me just do some quick math for you. That is a 22% decline in units sold. That is staggering. Now, if you look at the average sale price, the median sale price, that just ties back to there have been a lot less houses that have sold, meaning the bigger houses that have sold have definitely skewed the data. My friend Frank V weighing in, where I live, it's not quiet here on the water in the summertime. It's crazy busy. Asking price is still very high. Frank, thanks as always for watching and commenting. 100% true. Frank is in Bel Air, if I remember correctly, and he is always our boots on the ground there. So if you have any questions about what it's like to live in Bel Air, Michigan, Frank is a great resource for that. So thanks for watching, Frank. Let's talk about Harbor Springs. So Harbor Springs had 80 sales last year. So 71 divided by 80. They're down about 13%, 12%. Their average sale price is down. Their median sale price is up. When I was putting this together, this surprised me. So I went back and looked at each individual sale in Harbor Springs, and there has not been a real big sale in Harbor Springs, which is surprising because Harbor Springs was the original high-end resort market, and there just hasn't. Maybe it's been off market, or maybe it hasn't hit the MLS, but we have not seen a lot of high sales there this year. Now, the median sale has gone up significantly compared to last year. And I think that's a good example of it's just becoming very, very expensive to live anywhere in Harbor Springs. Gaylord, Michigan, one of the fastest growing relocation markets. They had 110 sales last year, 103 this year. That's a 7% decline. So not as bad. Their average sale and median sale is actually up. And I think that's an indicator. It's so interesting to me. And I love doing this. So I again appreciate it. It's so interesting to me what you learn by looking at this. So their sales are down and their prices are up, which means I would say Gaylord is becoming a lot a lot more similar to the rest of northern Michigan. It used to be an outlier where you could, get a lot of bang for your buck, and you still can. Look at the average and median sale prices; they're still much lower than some other areas, but that market has become incredibly popular. And I remember back when the boom started, a lot of people were looking at Gaylord that had not thought about Gaylord otherwise, and I think that's definitely an example of that. Traverse City, Traverse City is probably closer. If you look at the average price and the median price, their units sold is down. So, one of the big takeaways I hope you get from watching this is there's just less houses being sold in northern Michigan right now. Whether we like it or not, or whether people want to say it's still a buyer's market, it's only about 5% down in units, 4.5% down in units. But the sale price is, 529 to 533. That's what, less than 1%. 430 to 415. That's a couple percent. Traverse City has seemed to find their equilibrium. It is what it is there. There's some more inventory being added, which is helping. So I think Traverse City is probably the best example of a balanced market, especially when you consider they've only lost, what did I say a minute ago? Let me look back at my phone. Less than 5% decline in units sold. So, Traverse City, I was talking to a friend of mine that's an agent in Traverse City today, and she's having her best year ever. And now I see why, because her market is not being affected nearly as much as my market is. So maybe she's not a better agent than me after all. So that is some information about the halfway point, town by town. If you have any questions about any town in northern Michigan specifically, I just grabbed the big ones. Feel free to reach out to me directly if there's any town you want me to analyze in northern Michigan. Frank, if you want me to analyze Bel Air, just so you know, any subsect of any town, I'd certainly be happy to help you. So I want to go through the 10 shocking truths of northern Michigan real estate right now. Most homes are selling below asking price. Now, that's obviously something we just realized from looking at the data, that most homes are selling below asking price. Now, there's still the pockets, downtown Petoskey, Burt Lake, Walloon Lake, where you're seeing highest and best Mullet Lake sometimes, but a lot of houses are selling for under asking, and that's going to continue. I plan to do this again. I'll give you an update. Once we get past the fall, maybe around Halloween, somewhere around there, I'll give you another update, but we'll do another one of these when we look at the year in total in December, between Christmas and New Year. We'll probably do one of those. I think when we get to the end of the year, we're going to realize that this was, the same way the COVID years were once in a generation. I think we're going to learn a lot about what's the future for northern Michigan real estate. So make sure you keep watching the channel, because it's a very tumultuous time as northern Michigan tries to find its footing and try to figure out what it's going to be in the long run versus, we're not going to be in a market where it just swings back and forth from crazy to bad. At some point, it's going to stop. The market's going to stop dribbling, and we're going to find our equilibrium. That brings me to number 2 point. Waterfront homes can still spark bidding wars. I just mentioned it a minute ago. We were just involved in the highest and best on a $2 million house on the water. So they're still out there. There are still people. And what's interesting, there are still people. No, don't send me bad emails or drop crazy comments. There are still people that think a $2 million house on the water in northern Michigan is a bargain compared to other places. And if you look at, other resort areas with waterfront homes, Newport Beach, Miami, other places around the country, it is still a bargain. Lake Norman, Lake Travis, these are other lakes and other big areas. Northern Michigan is still a bargain, especially if you're in northern Michigan right now. Drop a comment. If you're watching this because you're in northern Michigan right now and the algorithm did what it did and served this to you, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I've never seen northern Michigan as busy as I've seen it right now. Downtown, Bay Harbor, Walloon, Indian River, everywhere that I hang out, there are people everywhere, which is great to see. Hopefully it's stimulating the local economy, and hopefully people are falling in love with the area and call me and want to buy a house. So that would be great. The boomer housing boom is a myth in some areas. Everybody talks about boomers cashing out in towns like Petoskey, Harbor Springs, but that's just not the case. There's a lot of baby boomers that are still holding on to their house, which is perfectly fine. I do think when we see the interest rates drop a little bit, that is going to change. But for now, they're not saturated in the market. Seasonal listings are skewing the data, but will continue to flood the market. Yeah, if you look at month by month, the seasonal data will skew the market. I do think those seasonal listings are going to continue from now until Thanksgiving. I think, again, this goes back to my one big prediction. So stick around to the end for that. I think we're going to continue to see more and more listings hitting the market, more and more price reductions. Tiny towns are experiencing the luxury creep. This is 100% true. It's something. This is one that I added myself after looking over everything. It seems like every place in northern Michigan now is seeing a little bit of a luxury creep. Places. I grew up in Indian River. I still have a house over there. We're seeing $700,000-$800,000 off water sales. Elk Rapids, we're seeing big, beautiful homes being built next to what used to be $300,000 or $400,000 homes. Harbor Springs, Petoskey are always going to have the luxury creep. It just seems like, for better or for worse, people with a lot of money or people with, are choosing to live the northern Michigan lifestyle, create their legacy here, build houses that they're going to pass down through their family, which I think we don't talk about enough in northern Michigan. I know a lot of you are watching because you're thinking about relocating here, but something we don't talk a lot about is just the legacy that comes with owning a northern Michigan home. I know so many people that have, the family cottage that's been in their family for generation after generation, who are striving to buy that house that's going to attract their kids and grandkids to come to northern Michigan. Northern Michigan is really as much about legacy as it is anything else. And I do think you definitely see a sense of pride with that. Short-term rentals are quietly saturating some areas. This is true also. These are my 10 truths. We own a short-term rental management company. It's something we started as, we've never really marketed it. We do it mainly for our private real estate clients as a service. We don't make a ton of money from it. We just do it because it's easier for us to do it than have our clients try to figure it out for themselves. We've had a lot of the people that we manage rentals for list them because they bought them as investments and they decided that, they had this romanticized idea of owning a short-term rental and it didn't really turn out the way they had hoped. And now they want to sell the house. So short-term rentals are definitely a large portion of the market. The listings in the market now are homes that were once short-term rentals. So that is 100% true. Building costs are still crazy high. They are still high. They're not as high as they once were, which is why I think you're going to see building costs and more people start to build. Building costs are still crazy high, but it's getting easier to build. And again, we're going to have a builder on here in the next couple of weeks to talk about that. Raw land isn't the golden opportunity everybody thinks. Everybody thinks they're going to go buy a cheap piece of land to build a house. One thing we talk about on this channel, but I don't hear many people talking about, vacant land's gotten expensive in northern Michigan. I remember when prime vacant land, which would be like northern Emmett County, close to Harbor Springs, close to Petoskey, but still in a rural area, would be like $4,000 an acre. And that was like premium vacant land. And then it was probably, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, I had this listing on School Road. You can look it up in Petoskey that I sold, that we listed as an Italian guy. Came to me because I'm Italian, which is wild how often it's funny how often I get business from Italian people because I have an Italian name. And obviously there's a connection there. So this Italian guy walks into my office, says, I want you to represent me, list this property. He wanted $10,000 an acre. And I thought, there's no way in hell. But if you've ever dealt with or negotiated with an Italian guy, they're stubborn. So wanted to earn his business. It was in the winter, needed a listing, took it. It sold the next day for $10,000 an acre. And that's in Resort Township. And since then, $10,000 an acre is now the floor of quality land in Resort Township. So obviously other areas are still less expensive, but it's still more expensive than you think it is. So if you're thinking about buying land or you've been keeping an eye on buying land, I would tell you to buy the land. It's easy to buy. We've got some great banks that can help you. It appreciates well. It's easy to own. It's cool to go to. And, I think vacant land in northern Michigan's, a solid investment, especially when you start talking about parcels over 20, 40, 60, 80 acres, because at some point the bigger parcels are going to get chopped up and we're just not going to have that type of property out here. Cash buyers are crushing first-time home buyers. That is the truth. We're seeing it a little bit less. There's a lot less cash offers than we used to see, but definitely it's tough to see somebody that's buying a house for a second home compete with somebody that's buying it for a first home, because those are it's just not a fair fight. And it's one of the unfortunate situations of living in a resort area, but it's definitely something we see. Maybe you're watching this. Maybe one of you watching this are one of the people that say this, but it seems like once a week, somebody comes on here and talks about how northern Michigan sucks because we're seeing a population decline. And my number 10 truth is we are seeing a population decline, but only on paper. And here's what I mean by that. We're seeing a population decline only on paper because people are leaving the area and being replaced by people who are not living here full-time or working here full-time, meaning if somebody sells a house and the person that buys it, if somebody sells a house that lives here full time and the person that buys it is not here full time, that's a -1. Meaning if I sell my house and I sell my house, move to Florida, somebody buys my house and they live here full time, that's a net neutral. But the person that lives here full time sells the house and sells it to somebody that lives here part time, that is a -1 because they don't count as a full time resident. They don't count towards the census. They don't count living here. So a lot of people think that Northern Michigan is declining. I would challenge anybody. I'll challenge you. If you're one of the people watching this to troll me, or if you're watching this to say that Northern Michigan is declining, I would challenge you to come up here and hang out because there are more people here than ever. And the decline is, again, it's only statistical. More people are coming to Northern Michigan than ever before. Now, are the people coming here, staying here as much? No. There's a lot of big houses on the lakes when I'm driving around on the boat or driving through Bay Harbor. There's a lot of big houses here that are only occupied a couple of days out of the year. So, there's that to contend with, but there are certainly more people here than ever. So as we wrap up, that is what is going on in Northern Michigan, 10 shocking truths, 10 predictions. I gave you the stats of what's going on. Hopefully you're a little bit more educated. So generally speaking, there are more listings hitting the market. Prices in Petoskey specifically are going up just because there's so much demand and just not enough houses for them. I'm genuinely curious how this is going to compare, how the halftime report compares to the end of the year report. I think we're going to see more of the same. I think we're going to see that the days on market went up. Prices probably stayed the same. There's probably going to have been a lot more listings on the market. Now, when we talk about this in December, it's going to be different because a lot of people take their houses off the market for the winter. So without further ado, I'm going to give you my one giant prediction. I think between now and the end of the year, my one giant prediction is this is going to be the best time in the last 5 years to buy a house in Northern Michigan. Rates are getting better. Sellers are getting more motivated. The writing's on the wall as inventory picks up. Sellers now, when I'm having conversations with sellers, they understand that the market is not what it was 2 years ago. And I think it took 6 months for that to set in, but it's certainly something we're seeing. And I've got a lot of sellers who want to sell their house who said, look, we want to get the most money that we possibly can, which they absolutely should. I cannot, and nobody would fault them for that. But they understand, look, I want the most money that I can, but I also want the house sold. So they're making an effort to actually sell the house versus, just digging the heels. And look, there are still people testing the market, which is something we deal with all the time. But I think you're going to see more and more people come into the market. I think my big prediction is this is going to be the best time. And I think we're going to be the busiest we've ever been the fall of this year. I think it's been a really tough year for us. We've made it through. Couldn't do without support of people like you. I appreciate all of our clients and all the people that refer us business, and you even for just watching this video. If you're just watching this video, that one extra review on the videos makes me smile a little bit more. So I really appreciate that. Again, it's Friday night. If you're in Northern Michigan, if you're in anywhere else, have a safe weekend. If you need me, I will be at the Colt Ford concert. So I've got 2 extra tickets. If you want to go, let me know. And thank you so much for hanging out with me.